Okay, you're good to go.
Thank you. The time is now 6:03 p.m. and I call to order the December 9th, 2020 meeting of the Cuyahoga Falls Board of Zoning Appeals. This is the voice of Deborah Monaco. I'm the chair of the board. The rest of the board consists of volunteers from the community who have been nominated by the mayor and approved by City Council. Per COVID-19 regulations, we are conducting the meeting via Zoom, and it's also being broadcast on 96.1 WCFI FM. Public has been advised of their ability to listen to the meeting through that radio station, as well as their ability to submit questions or remarks via email 24 hours in advance of this meeting. We do also have a mechanism for them to be able to call in.
Debbie,
yeah.
excuse me a minute. We're no longer doing it on the radio station. We're doing it through We're doing it through YouTube Live. YouTube Live now.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When you are called upon to participate, you can either unmute yourself or just temporarily hold down the space bar. We need to make sure we only have one person speaking at a time so that we make a clear record. And also ask that you go ahead and mute any other devices or things that could make noise in the background. With that introduction, we will have our secretary, Ben Levenger, take roll call. Ben, you're muted.
Press the space bar, it just didn't work. So I didn't get your email, but I will run through roll call real quick. Cindy Kane.
Present.
Ed Caruso.
Present.
Amanda Kephart.
Present.
Tom Shaheen.
Present.
Rob Goldstein.
Present.
Deb Monaco.
Present. Also from the city, then we have participating Adam Paul and Lori Jones. Per the bylaws, the way we will conduct the meeting is Mr. Levenger will read the record, file it into the record. The city will review the staff report. The applicant and any representatives will have an opportunity to speak. Any public participation will then occur. Then the board will deliberate and then vote. Mr. Levenger, the item on the agenda, please.
Sure. File variance 20-00046, area variance, applicant Carl Warther and Representative David Pellegra and Architects Incorporated have applied for a variance for the Cuyahoga Falls General Development Code at 2404 7th Street to accommodate construction of a new Dairy Queen restaurant with drive-through. 1133.02, limited uses. D, retail uses. 2, drive-through establishments. C, states all elements of the drive-through shall be at least 50 feet from any residentially zoned lot. The applicant is proposing a menu board at 22 feet from a residentially zoned lot and other drive-through elements with a minimum setback.
Do any board members have a conflict of interest with this item? If so, just unmute yourself. Okay, that being covered, we'll turn our attention to Mr. Paul.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Paul. I'm the senior planner with the city. Thanks for your time this evening. Thank you to our applicant for putting forward their materials here and working on a business expansion in the city. And thank you to our board members. It's good to see the full complement of the board tonight. And so we'll get right to it here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Excuse me. Okay. Everybody with me so far here as we look at our agenda? There again, as Mr. Levenger read into the record, we have just the one item of new business for consideration tonight. And so we'll start that onto the staff report here. The application summary is the same as that which is listed in the agenda. The project location is basically at the intersection of Portage Trail and 7th Street. The street address is 2404 7th Street. This parcel at that address is owned by the applicant where there's currently a single family residential use. They had just recently gotten the recommendation of our planning commission to have that parcel rezoned to MU4, which is consistent with the parcel that the Dairy Queen restaurant exists on now. And so that's all tied to part of the potential expansion here of their new restaurant. Relevant code sections for reference, again, the zoning districts in 1131.02 and the Board of Zoning Appeals summary. And those, again, mentioned within the specific application summary and the agenda. The immediate area information, and there's a figure 1 here is the zoning map, just to give you some context of what's around there. The mixed use 4 suburban corridor district is part of all of that Portage Trail corridor. Of course, we've got a large parcel across the street there where Discount Drug Mart is located, and then the Dairy Queen, which is situated here. I put a star on the parcel. You can see currently it's yellow of the R4 residential zoning designation. That should change having City Council's acceptance of the Planning Commission's recommendation. So part of the stipulation of that was that need to make sure that before that zoning is amended, that the applicant try to work through some difficulties on the site and propose a zoning compliant project. And so that's what ended up being here. And we'll get into a little bit of that here now as we discuss this project. But the surrounding uses, you're probably all very familiar with this section of the city and the site in particular that we're referring to. If you're not, just north of it, there's single family residences on 7th Street that go on up into neighborhoods, those nearby where Mr. Levenger I know lives. And let's see, we've got office uses next there. Across the street, again, you've got the discount retail store. There's commercial and some other office. There have been a couple vacancies in that area on the other side of Portage Trail, but they all carry that same MU4 mixed use zoning designation. And both of those, both the R4 and the MU4 are appropriate in terms of where they're at for that location of the city and abutting each other as districts. The zoning use and descriptions characterized by a mix of other retail and professional office uses. And here again, just a quick recap on the proposed project is that Dairy Queen is currently located there. Subject parcel is currently a single family use recommended for rezoning, and that's in part to accommodate this expansion. And as stated prior to City Council confirmation, we wanted to look at all the different elements that they would need for a zoning compliant site. Provided here in your staff report, the statement of facts narrative that comes with the application. This just gives you some details on the potential project here, some of the new site sizes, the additional parking, and then site lighting and some other statistics about the Dairy Queen business. And then within it, you'll see in item number 8 here, provided by Mr. Pellegra, the proposed site plan has been presented, and we've reviewed this at a couple different iterations and still ended up before you tonight. Mr. Pellegra's had a number of different projects. Maybe I don't know how many have been to the Board of Zoning Appeals. We've seen several other come through here. And so he's got pretty good familiarity with the city's code and what's required of it. So looking here at the proposed site aerial, you can see I'm moving my cursor over this, and these parcels that are part of their development are all outlined here in red, but this is the existing Dairy Queen restaurant. They own these properties here, which make up that single family use that abuts it now. If you'll notice, and I'll zoom in on this a little bit, this drive-through facility itself is currently existing at a non-conforming setback to that residential property use to the north. The next image I provided is one here to try to show you, and this is good for general reference using Summit County's GIS tools. Just a generic measurement of where about that would be in terms of the parcel as it is now for the 22 feet to where the menu board would be, even though it would be a little further into the site than what that measurement shows you. Moving again through the staff report here, we've got a fairly detailed site plan that you can get a look at, and this helps really define exactly what we're talking about in terms of the distance from the menu board to the property line to the north where you have the residential use and some other elements of the drive-through. I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit so you can see it. And of course, this was all provided in detail with your packets, but here we've got the menu board. You can see 2 proposed drive-through lanes now in what would be the new site development. There's a wood fence along the northern property line and some additional things that they would add as part of this build out. Here's a more detailed view of what they would propose along that line, and that would include elements to comply with the city's heavy screening requirements there. You can see this is a solid fence with masonry piers. That's part of the mixed use design requirements. And then they've got some additional landscaping here that would be required to go between there as well. And all of that would help to try to provide a better buffer from the residential use to the north. You can see 6-foot high screening fence, the masonry piers for supports, and then this is your setback distance right here to this menu board. And that's where we would expect, probably the most drive-through use or impact to the potential residential use to the north would be, is right there where you've got the actual ordering activity. Dumpster enclosure area is also within that setback distance. That's a service area technically by our code, but it's on there for context, and so you have that detail as well. So moving on to our review criteria, I'll go through this mostly verbatim so that we do make sure we've got a good record for it and so we can establish all these different points should you have further questions or concerns. Review criteria: the difficulty cannot be alleviated by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than by a variance. Now, the location of the existing building and entrance exits make redevelopment of this site somewhat constricted. Part of that is due to the fact that they need to remain open to do so. The way that the current building is situated on the site and where the multiple curb cuts on Portage Trail and their ingress egress at 7th Street are is kind of playing a role in terms of how they can get in there, continue to work while they're open, and also get to work on the reinvestment and redevelopment of the site. B, the plight of the owner is due to unique circumstances of the property and not to general conditions in the neighborhood. Unique circumstances result from sources beyond the control of the individual owner. Those can be considered beyond the control of the current owner, as expansion or revitalization options are limited in terms of the location of that building and how you can get in and out of that site now. Unique circumstances relate only to the property and not the individual applicant. The existing property and position of the drive-through restaurant currently in relation to the somewhat abstract shape of the parcels present unique circumstances and physical obstacles. Now, if you look at that, and if they were to combine them all into one, it would be a somewhat odd parcel in terms of its shape, particularly at a corner lot. It's not perfectly situated there. And so given the close proximity of the neighboring use further up Portage Trail to the west, and again, the way that their drive-through is oriented now, there's some challenges with how they would get back into this site for a new drive-through use. C, the development sought to be authorized by variance will not alter the essential character of the locality and is the minimum variation to relieve the practical difficulty. The requested setback for drive-through facilities will not alter the essential character of the locality. However, planning staff is concerned with the potential impact to adjacent residential uses. And that's really just to say that it exists to help protect that, to help limit the impact that this type of use might have on a neighboring residential use. It is allowed in the code to have a drive-through restaurant in the MU4 district. It's a limited use, and so that just requires certain extra criteria, like the landscaping that you would see in the buffering along that northern property line there. So certainly we don't think that it would alter the essential character of the use because it's in use at that site now. And it's also sharing frontage on Portage Trail, one of the major commercial corridors in the city. And D, the variation is not substantial in relation to the requirement and will not have any adverse effect on services or adjacent property. The variation is substantial in relation to the requirement. However, it's a fairly substantial requirement in and of itself to have a 50-foot setback. So that's all part of that. But again, I think, yes, it is somewhat substantial in relation to it. That said, the existing drive-through facilities, as mentioned, are closer to the property line now than what this new one would be. And that's just to say that the drive-through itself is right along that fence line of a residential use now. The applicant felt there might be potential site constraints even if reorienting the proposed building. Per our code, the applicant is showing a heavy screening buffer to the adjacent residential use to the north. Review criteria E, whether in view of the manner in which the difficulty arose and considering all of the above factors, the interests of justice will be served by allowing a variance. The interest of justice would be served in this case due to the fact that redevelopment of the site, while still supporting the existing business, may not be feasible without some degree of variance from the code. And that again gets back to the fact that we've had some different site considerations here and met not only for the required meeting to obtain a rezoning for our planning commission, but we met between then and now to go over some of these site details, how a redesign might get closer to compliance with the code, and still landed on this being what they felt was the most plausible means to getting that to move forward. Another factor is the fact that allowing a variance would not substantially alter the character of the locality. And I think that's part of the key criteria you look at is, what are the potential impacts? Are we doing something that would adversely affect the immediate area? I think given the fact that it exists there now and would be the same use to continue, leads us to believe that no, there would not be an issue with permitting a variance for that use. So mitigating factors and alternate design come down really to an overall site redesign. The applicant could conceivably pursue a different layout altogether. As previously stated, this might call into question other site impacts, which might result in the need for a variance still. And some of these things are design elements that are specific to the use in the zoning district that we might not always have here that we can work through with internal review. But it still seemed like in some way or another, there are going to be certain site elements, if this site's going to be redeveloped, that are going to require some variation from the code. So that gets us to our findings, and staff finds that the requested variance is a substantial departure from the code requirement to keep all drive-through facilities 50 feet from property lines of residential uses. Staff also finds that the essential character of the locality in question would not be altered by the granting of the variance. Additional measures such as an acoustical fence and heavy landscape screening are shown to mitigate the impacts of the new drive-through facility. And conclusions from our department read as follows. The use is a limited use in the mixed use 4 district requiring specific design guidelines. The site is currently in use with a non-conforming drive-through facility in relation to a residential use to the north, similar in character to the request in this application. They're essentially just moving it further north. The applicant reviewed and explained potential alternate site designs with city staff and believes the proposed layout, in part driven by the need to maintain their business during site redevelopment, is the best way they can proceed. The existing location and site orientation would be a factor outside of the control of the owner. Staff concludes that granting a variance from section 1133.02 limited uses D retail uses 2 drive-through establishments C, and that is that section of code that holds that requirement that the entirety of the drive-through facilities need to be a minimum of 50 feet from any residentially zoned use. Granting that variance would serve the interest of justice and alleviate the practical difficulty unique to the circumstances of the Dairy Queen restaurant and proposed new development as described in file VAR-20-00046. The code states all elements of the drive-through shall be at least 50 feet from any residentially zoned lot. The applicant is proposing a menu board at 22 feet from a residentially zoned lot. Beyond that is a sample motion provided just for your reference should you choose to lean on those things, and I'll read those into the record so that you have an understanding as to how we reached the staff recommendation. And one is that the setback variance request is based on review of multiple site plan layouts based on constraints specific to characteristics and the business operations of the associated properties. 2, the proposed drive-through restaurant will not alter the essential character of the locality. And 3, the proposed addition will require installation of a new heavy landscape buffer. And so that concludes my report. I'll go ahead. If it's helpful, I'll leave this up on the screen and we can go back through parts of the report. you can let me know. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Paul.
Mhm.
I randomly selected the order of names prior to the start of the meeting. So in terms of questions for Mr. Paul, we'll start with Ms. Kephart.
I do not have any questions at this time.
Mr. Levenger,
No questions.
Ms. Kane,
We have not heard anything negative from anyone on this, like no concerns from the public.
I've not been contacted by anybody directly. I've not been forwarded any correspondence from our departmental email inbox, and we've recently upgraded one of our phone systems to have to give you a voice automated option to choose different staff based on what your inquiry or concern might be. To my knowledge, we've received no correspondence about, in fact, either because the public was also notified of the zoning amendment to be applied for here and the variance itself. I've not had any correspondence about it.
I'm next on the list, and I want to make sure I understand that the menu boards under the new proposal will actually be further away from the property line than they are presently.
Not the menu boards, but elements of the drive-through, and that's kind of that general term in the code that can make it a little confusing. I've gone back up to an aerial image of the map here, and you can see their menu board currently, I don't know if it wraps this corner, if it's just on the back side of the building. Now, that might be close to the same distance in and of itself. But as you can see, vehicular traffic is actually right up against the property line there. So I consider part of that, whether it's curbing, vehicles, radios running, whatever it is, part of the drive-through element, as I think the code does. And so in my interpretation of the code, this is closer now than what they're requesting. However, if you look at this, the residence itself in this orientation, in this current layout is a further distance from the drive-through facility than what the proposed new development would have. And that would be 22 feet from this property line. So, you have, the house is not centered on this lot. So it is further to the property line to the north, and there'd still be sufficient separation there. And then 22 feet from this property line, right about here is where the menu board would be. We can go back to the site plan as well, which is probably a little more helpful than me just using a cursor on an aerial map. And so here you've got the residence called out, and you can see there's actually a little more separation here. And it's to where you get down to at this point down here where the menu board is, that you have that proximity. We want to go from the closest point to where something might impact it in terms of closest point to the property line.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I was also just kind of curious whether the fence and landscaping will be comparable to what we recently approved for Drug Mart.
Yes. I could show you some photos of what went in for Drug Mart, but also being in a mixed use district, when they went through for their fence details, they did the same thing. And that's a requirement for masonry piers as supports at no more than every 16 feet. And so they also used a solid wood fence in the same way or very similar as to what is proposed here. In fact, let me see if I can get to that.
Yeah, I believe it's a shadow box fence. It's not solid.
Oh, a Drug Mart. Okay. Yeah, that could be true. And I do have it here. So here's in part what you see, yeah. And this goes down the line there. This retaining wall was separate of that to help support what they were adding to the building there. Yeah, and then they did their plan in terms of landscaping was a little bit different because we wanted to see some of the tree replacement there that had to come down in order to support the building addition on that corner. But similar, yeah, to answer your question.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Crusoe?
Yeah, Adam, could you clarify, B1 says that the plight is not self-inflicted or financial.
Okay. So
The building's remaining open, correct?
that's correct.
Wouldn't that
That's the
be
intention.
financial?
Let's come back to here. Okay, you're referring to B, the plight of the owner, unique circumstances beyond the control of the individual owner. I see the fact that the building exists, and the applicant will have to speak to this, but I think that it was in existence and in use in this fashion prior to their taking ownership of it. There are certain other elements that I was talking about in our code that we don't want to see happen as well when we see new or redevelopment come in. Certain aspects of that might include like new curb cuts on Portage Trail. You don't really want to have that. For mixed use districts, while we do want to get buildings closer to pedestrian oriented districts, there isn't really anywhere along that stretch of Portage Trail. We ran into the same thing with Drug Mart across the street in terms of doing things like putting street trees in or buffering that with a frontage buffer as we might require in a new mixed use development. We can't achieve some of those other things at that area of Portage Trail as it is. And so I think some of those elements do factor into being out of their control. I looked at it somewhat, I think, in the same way you might be to say, well, you know, if it's going to be new, let's wipe it out and see what you can't start from here. Could you design something on this site that does meet it? But I think when you take into consideration all of those other design elements, and you know, we'll have our engineering department involved in looking at all the different things that might be required to make new ingress egress on a corner lot, particularly one that does still face on a residential frontage on 7th Street. There are still some difficulties there. And so that's how I came to that conclusion.
Okay, yeah, I understand. I was just questioning one of the stipulations is it's not self-inflicted or financial.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming we're leaving the current building open and running for only financial reasons. Well, why else would we leave it up and running?
Correct. That's part of their model and part of what is driving their ability to redevelop the site, whether it's zoning compliant or requires a variance. At least per their statement in our meetings, you know, as staff and with their architect.
Mr. Goldstein?
Out of curiosity, is there any best practices for the distance from the menu board to the drive-through window? Any car lengths or?
Not that I know of other than our code. And so that would be the only one pertinent to me, I think, in this case, and probably in your consideration. And so I think if you think that it's reasonable enough to accommodate a new 2-lane drive-through, you know, that's what's on your plate.
I was thinking in terms of the menu board being around that corner a little bit, which would bring the main objection, the sound
Right.
from that further from the residents. But
yeah, I think that the way, if we go back to look at the site plan, and again, I think that this is probably something that's going to need to be addressed by our applicant or the representative, Dave Pellecra. I think that impacts the way that they can get their customers, the 2 lanes tapered into one, to get from ordering to pickup if they were to move the board up here. Because as I understood it from a recent meeting we had in this orientation, they have the ability to identify which order is coming and to move that person forward appropriately. And so they're adopting a model, I think, that's used in other Dairy Queens. And I think that pertains in part to this distance here, that You wouldn't
Adam,
really have the stoppage for ordering, right? You would just have,
Eat there before you split.
evident who proceeds.
So what they're doing is they're increasing their stacking distance in their driveways.
Mhm.
Currently, their driveway, I can speak to this because I live just up the street, sometimes is actually on 7th Street waiting to get into the area to order. So what they've done is effectively doubled their stacking distance for their driveways.
Right. And we talked about that detail in terms of, where those requirements come in and how we would consider 2 against 1 lanes and how they are trying to build some of that into this space here to get off of the street and out of the right of way and over here to start that process.
I wasn't talking about eliminating a lane. I was just saying moving the menu board up another 10 feet, which gives you another 10 feet between there and the residence, still maintaining 2 lanes. I just was wondering the feasibility of that.
Yeah, I think I understood your question correctly. I don't know if you're talking about moving it west around this corner or not.
Well, not necessarily around the corner, just from where it is now, in the outer lane.
Yeah, I think they'll have to answer that. Again, I think it's about how they can efficiently process customers from 2 into 1 pickup lane from the point of ordering here.
Mr. Shaheen?
I have no questions.
In that case, we'll thank Mr. Paul for the report, and we'll move to the applicant. Mr. Werther, would you like to speak or have somebody speak on your behalf?
Let me, I'm Dave Pellegra, I'm the architect.
Thank you, Mr. Pellegra. Could you please state your name and address for the record?
Sure, David Pellegra, 2231 Broad Boulevard in Cuyahoga Falls.
And do you promise that everything you're about to say will be truthful?
I do.
Great. Why don't you proceed? Thank you.
Okay. Well, just to kind of give everybody a little bit of a background, I'll go way back about 30 years ago. I was in one of the seats that you folks were because I was also a member of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Unfortunately, I moved to the city of Akron, so that gave me one choice that I had to resign. So I have been there before. So thank you for what you're doing. We started this project with a meeting with the planning department and primarily, I think it was Diana Calavecchio back in September 15th, and kind of went through the project. And since then, both Adam Paul and Fred Guerrero have been very kind to help give us as much guidance as they can to get where we're at presently. So everybody should understand that Dairy Queen uses a prototype building. So we have that prototype that we can make minor modifications to, but it's not essentially a custom-made building just for this project. So it's all everybody understands. So other than that, I'd say Adam's summary was right on point. The only thing that I would like to make everybody aware of that, Adam, if you'd go back to the site and you take a measurement from that southwest corner of the house to our board that I know I've just done on my survey, you're going to find that it's 70 feet from the corner of the house to the order board. In between that 70 feet is actually the location of their garage. So I point this out because I have to agree the code states what it says, but in reality, that distance is 70 feet from someone that would be actually from the exterior of the house. Yeah, that's exactly what I was just pointing out. So other than that, this new facility provides us additional parking that we don't have. Some of our parking right now is currently used by the adjoining tenant, the Central Instrument, which, that's fine. They've been able to do that. That'll probably change with this build out because of the fence and the arrangement for the cars, but we had to be very sensitive about trying to make this work on the site. And it's probably never apparent until you're in my shoes, but we probably did 4 or 5 different sites trying to get them to come together. But with the corner lot, it kind of gives us a little bit of a difficulty because of it's a corner lot and the setbacks. And then we have to access the street in appropriate positions that we do not interfere with the intersection. Add to that, I've got a building that I can't tear off to keep another business going. I think the solution speaks for itself. So I'm thankful to present it. Open to ideas if there's anything that the group can share.
Mr. Werther or anybody else want to speak on behalf of the applicant?
My name is Carl Werther. No, Dave pretty much summed it up.
Just one moment, please, if you'd state your name and address for the record.
Yep, my name is Carl Werther. My address is 715 Portage Trail in Cuyahoga Falls.
And do you promise to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that Dave pretty much summed up. You know, we went through all these different designs and tried to figure out which way the building should lay. And unfortunately, with the way the parcels lay, it's just hard to get a position just right. So what he said is pretty much what I would say.
Okay, well, thank you for that. If you'll go ahead and mute yourselves temporarily, at least, we'll go through in the same random order as previous. Ms. Kephart, any questions for the applicant?
Not necessarily a question, but just a general observation. So the house that's on the other side of 7th Street, that's next to the drug mart, they're going to be the home that's going to get most of this increased volume. Is that correct? Because the way that the telecom is going to be going back and forth.
You said the one across the street from Drug Mart?
Yeah, the one that's on the same side of 7th Street as Drug Mart.
No, the anticipation is that this house right here is the one that would now be, as Dave was mentioning, the corner of the house itself would be approximately, according to his measurement, 70 feet to the new menu board over here on this parcel. And that menu board itself would be 22 feet south of this property line.
Okay, I was just considering the other homes that are to the home that's to the right of the location, and just, I'm assuming that was considered because obviously that with that lot changing, that's going to affect their view and potentially their sound, but it was more an observation. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this house would be gone.
Yep.
That's correct. And it would become part of a new Dairy Queen drive-thru.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Levenger?
No, no questions for me. I can say that you desperately need some more space. So,
Ms. Kane?
I have no question.
I don't have any questions. Mr. Caruso?
Questions for the applicant, you mean?
Correct.
Only one question: would they consider one less drive-through lane? Obviously, the one that adjoins the property, the residential property in question.
With the volume of cars, that's why they want to go to the 2 lanes. I should also point out, whether everybody realizes that versus their current facility, we're going to have a payment window and a pickup window that are going to be separated. So, but no, at this time, we need those 2 lanes. I think it was probably stated in one of our meetings together with Adam and Fred. I believe their business is about 70% through the drive-through.
That's the same recollection I have from the last discussion we had on this, as you were still working through the site details. I have a follow-up question to that for Mr. Caruso, and maybe this will provide a little context. Based on these measurements, even with this being at 22 feet, if you dropped it, if you didn't have 2 drive-through lanes and only had 11, it looks like you would still need a variance from the north property line, even for just 1 drive-through lane around that same corner, right?
Yeah, I agree, but you'd also get cars idling and exhaust fumes 17 feet further from the resident.
Right.
Mr. Goldstein,
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Shaheen,
I have no questions.
so I will just inquire whether there is anyone from the public participating, waiting to speak. Okay, I will take that as a no. So in the same order as before, we'll turn to individual members of the board for their remarks and their intended vote. Ms. Kephart.
I have no additional remarks and I approve the variance.
Mr. Levenger.
No remarks, and I approve the variance.
Ms. Kane.
No remarks, and I'm in favor as well.
I do find that there are some unique circumstances here. The orientation of the lot and where the present placement of entrances and exits are that's a reality they have to deal with. I don't find the change will alter the character of the locality. I do support keeping the current business open. It's probably what will help afford the construction. I think overall, we've seen a couple nice improvements to that little stretch on Portage Trail. So I'm in favor of the variance request. Mr. Caruso.
I would not be in favor of the request, mainly because the code states it needs to be 50 feet from all elements. I don't really think the menu board's the issue in my mind. It's the stacking of cars well within 50 feet of the residence. You're talking about stacking cars and cars idling. I believe that's why the 50-foot requirement's there in the first place.
Mr. Goldstein.
I feel after considering everything that's been presented and the efforts that the owner has made to do the best there, I would be in favor. I think justice would be served by approving it.
Mr. Shaheen.
I would mainly be in favor of it because I know at the current location, the line of cars, and maybe Ben could actually answer this since he lives close by, can actually currently go out onto 7th Street. And I think it's quite the hazard. And those cars actually idle for a long time because there is only 1 lane. And so I think going to the 2-lane model will actually reduce the amount of time, although I realize it is closer to the home that's there. But with the fencing, the fencing and the landscaping, I think it would help. And I also like the improvement of the site in general. So I would be in favor of it.
It appearing that deliberations are concluded, I will now entertain a motion. If you'd like to be that person, if you'll unmute yourself and identify yourself by name, please.
I can motion.
Okay, so we will need you to read your proposed motion into the record, please.
Okay. 1 minute. I'm having trouble getting it to come up because our pictures are in the way. Okay. I propose that we approve the setback variance of 22 feet from the property line of parcel number 0200234 for new drive through lane facilities related to the redevelopment or replacement of the Dairy Queen restaurant at the intersection of Portage Trail and 7th Street associated with file variance 20-00046. Do we need to put the following in it also? The 3 contingencies too, or no?
I would say yes, sir, please.
Okay. All right. Based on the following findings, the setback variance requested is based on a review of multiple plan sites based on specific to characteristics and business operations of the associated properties. And, I can't get to the end of that, Adam. There you go. Thank you. Associated properties and owners. Number 2, the proposed drive-through restaurant will not alter the essential character of the locality, as it is an existing and limited use in the MU4 zoning district abutting a residential use. And number 3, the proposed addition will require installation of a new heavy landscape buffer per requirements of the City of Cuyahoga Falls General Development Code.
Do I have a second? If so, please state your name.
Bob Goldstein, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we will now vote in the same order. Ms. Kephart,
Yes.
Mr. Levenger,
Yes.
Ms. Kane,
Yes.
Deb Monaco, yes. Mr. Caruso,
No.
Mr. Goldstein,
Yes.
Mr. Shaheen.
Yes.
So with a vote of 6-1, then the variance has been approved. And we would certainly like to thank you for your participation this evening and wish you luck with your efforts. And thank you for reinvesting in Cuyahoga Falls.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
The other issue on our agenda this evening is the approval of the prior minutes. I assume everybody's had a chance to take a look at that. Do we have any revisions, corrections, whatnot?
I make a motion to approve as submitted.
That was Ms. Kane. Do we have a second?
Ed Caruso seconds.
Thank you. I guess we will ask if anybody does not approve to unmute yourself. Okay, then the minutes are approved as written. And unless there's anything else, we would just need a motion to adjourn.
Deb, before we close, question. Typically, I have a sheet of paper to fill out with who said what, who started it. I don't have a digital form for that.
Good point. I'm sure we can get you one. Lori?
We haven't been using them in any of the meetings at this point. I have a recording, John Konich has a recording, and I have it written, so we just haven't been using it.
And that's fine. I just didn't have one to fill out, so.
Your job just got easier.
What it looks like.
Nice to see everybody. Thank you for your work. And I move to
That was Ms. Kane. Do we have a second?
I second. Tom Sheehy.
Thank you, everybody. I guess we are adjourned. Thank you.
Okay. Good job as always. Thank you very much. We appreciate your volunteerism. Hope you all enjoy. I don't think, Lori, did you send an email? We have nothing further on the agenda for the next upcoming meeting.
Now, I think the next meeting was the 23rd and there's nothing. So I think I sent an email saying that.
Great. So happy holidays to you all. Hopefully you get healthy or stay healthy. I don't know everybody's situation right now, but do your best. And thanks for your thoughtful consideration of these applications and taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam.
You bet. Happy holidays.